thank you all for checking out this week's episode. Once again, I'm John. If you like what you heard and saw today, subscribe to our YouTube channel, find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and check out our brand new merch store with hats, coffee mugs, t-shirts, other cool stuff coming down the pipeline. Again, thank you all for support. Be safe, and see you next week. How's it going, everyone? John here, the host of Spirit Talk, and today we have to welcome the metal motivator himself, CJ Ortiz, to the show. CJ, for the last 25 plus years, has been a motivational speaker, branding and marketing expert, publisher, life, business coach. He's also the co-host of one of my favorite podcasts with Pat McNamara, the University of Badassery, which is streaming everywhere. CJ, it's great to have you on here today.
Good to have you with me. No, I'm kidding. That's the joke that anybody who does podcasts on a regular basis, you get your wires crossed on where you're supposed to be and whatnot. So I'm used to being in your chair. So, but no, great to be with you, man. And thank you very much for taking the time.
And I kind of want to start here. I hate dating these episodes because the pandemic obviously affected everyone. But one of the cool things from that, one of the very first podcasts I came across, because I never understood it. I never had the time. Now I'm familiar with Joe Rogan stuff just because of the video aspect of it. But when it came to listening to other people talk, yourself and Pat's podcast, the Badassery, there is something to it. Whereas at first I'm kind of like, I don't want to know if I want to listen to people talk about tactics or having lived that life. I want to separate myself from that. Sure. But the way you guys talk about the core beliefs, whether it's integrity, honesty, courage, bravery, how to deal with fear, it's when the pandemic hit, did you guys realize that how essential and needed voices like yourselves were going to be?
Not initially. Well, the only thing we thought is people will have more time to listen, but the podcast had originally started something that I was doing called Metal Excellence, and he was the first guest. And after the first interview with him, I said, you know what, dude, I used to have a co-host with something I used to do. You would be great as a co-host. And he agreed to it. And so we kind of went from there. But as you know, Pat has just his own audience. And they're not necessarily people who are heavy metal, whatever, fans, but they love him to death and they'll listen to anything he puts out there. So after a while, I realized, the name may be more of a hindrance than it is anything else. And so I had something called the University of Badassery. I had a shirt with it on. And it was based around a quote that I wrote that said, to be a badass, you have to kick ass. The first ass you need to kick is your own. And so in other words, it's more tongue in cheek. We're not saying we're the badasses by any stretch of the imagination. Right. I'm not saying we're not, but we're talking about badassery in general. But as time went on, just like with Mac himself, you began to see that it was almost perfectly timed. Obviously, we can't take credit for that. We started it before the pandemic, and it just kind of grew from there. Then we started our coaching group, and so that kind of put a little bit of a damper on the podcast in a way, because we were doing so many live streams and Zoom calls and things like that for a dedicated group, because we wanted to work specifically with people, and not just have an audience out there that just kind of hears things. But it certainly did grow, and with Mac, interesting, a lot of the stuff that he's gotten criticism for from people on social media were all things that eventually came true. So everything, he's a big proponent of never have your car in the driveway with less than 3/4 of a tank, for example. And so he got a lot of crap for that. That's a lot of trouble, that's a lot of money, blah, blah, blah. Well, then we had, especially here in North Carolina, the grid went down, and so nobody could really get any gas. And then even down to, I was looking at a clip the other day that my son had actually shot. We were at one of his Sentinel courses, and he was going through his what he carries in his vehicle, and he pulled out a just massive bag full of AR-15 mags. And he was talking about, he said, if a school shooting goes down and my kids are in there, I'm not waiting. I can't wait for law enforcement. Law enforcement has a problem. Law enforcement this, and sometimes I have to go in. And then he had a security vest, fluorescent security vest that he would put on to help distinguish him, to give him at least that little bit of time in case there was some, misunderstanding or what have you. Well, of course, everybody went ballistic when we first posted that, because they were like, who are you, vigilante? And then Uvalde happened.
Yep.
So just about everything. So that's kind of the way everything has sort of gone. It's like the more time has gone on, the more the stuff that we unintentionally, said ended up becoming more relevant.
Is it tiring for you to, when you talk about all this stuff, whether it's the bravery or how to deal with self-doubt or find the courage to do something or push yourself or how to become more resilient, when you talk about this stuff, does it ever get tiring for yourself where some days when you are feeling the opposite of what you're saying, where it's like, how do I kind of separate my own personal bad days versus encouraging others to have better days?
Well, that's a really good question, because people can start to think, if all they see is this video, video image, and hearing what you say and read what you write, they can think you don't have bad days. They can think, you don't need, you're always motivated, you're always up, you're always whatever. But we know that's not the case, and I don't know that I've ever heard anybody that actually has ever suggested that, but you can get that impression, certainly. And what I often tell people is the issue is not whether I'm knocked down. The issue is which one of us gets back up first. I went through the worst time of my life back in summer of 2011. But what had happened, usually for someone to recover from that can take years. But it took me about 3 months. And the only reason why is because of the preceding 25 years of, personal development. I mean, hardcore stuff, hardcore meditation, study, thought, practical self-improvement, really, really, and not just dealing with head or emotions, but I mean comprehensive, everything. We don't leave any stone unturned. They're not going to be, great over here in physical fitness, for example, and then, treat my kids like crap, or, be great at my job, but my finances suck. It's comprehensive, health, diet, everything. But to do that, then it makes it much, much easier to recover. Yeah, I mean, the times when I will say this though, in all honesty, I've always got my why, I've always got the reason why I'll do something. I just may be dragging ass like an alligator sometimes. You know what I mean? You're just tired. You travel a lot. You know what I mean? You put in the hours, bro, and you got to be on, and not just on physically, but mentally alert. You're serious security, man. That's exhausting. And sometimes you're just not feeling it. And so I learned I'll never get to my goals faster by condemning myself. I'll never get my goals faster by guilt has never helped me achieve anything in life. So I don't spend much time with it. You know what I mean? I just get right back on the horse as if I never fell off.
I find, obviously both of us being males, there's a stigma with asking for help or talking about some of these problems, whether it's mental or physical. And again, I think that's why I resonate with what your show and everything you've talked about, even as your individual stuff with the mental motivation. It's like, maybe that's why I resonate so much with, here's another guy talking about stuff or feelings I have that I share, or maybe I disagree with some of the stuff you say, but it's hearing another man say something like that openly where I kind of gravitate towards you. And again, I can't, there's been times where we'll share, like always your stuff pops up on Facebook or Instagram, and it's like, it hits at the right time where you got to share this to someone that maybe doesn't know who you are, or someone that doesn't like metal music, but what you're saying, it hits the core. And again, I can't thank you enough for when you put yourself out there like that. But as a man to another man, it's assuring that there's a sense of pride for me where it's like, you know what he's saying, I felt that the other day. I'm glad he's saying it. Now I have the confidence or courage to say that or preach what he's saying.
Yeah, I think that's great. And you know, I wasn't familiar with what you were doing, and then just the last couple of days started checking out what you were. I said, wow, he's got his game, he's got his act together, man. Because you know, you get hit up by people and they're like, dude, you're their
Oh, for
second
sure.
episode or something. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And I want to help as many people as I can, but it's always great to see somebody who's kind of got their act together professionally. You know, they got the tech dialed in and all that. They got an audience, for God's sake. Yeah, I mean, I mean, sometimes I'll joke. I'll say, because we're both social media people, I'll say, man, you know, I'm a little tired of the motivational content. Because it's everywhere and everybody's a motivator, you know, which is good. I love that there's positivity out there. Like you said, not that you necessarily agree with everything that's being said, but I'd rather have that than the bitching, you know, any day of the
Right.
week. But yeah, I think for men, it's you know, typically not like us to ask for directions or to
Oh,
ask for help. You know,
drive around a car for 30 minutes as opposed to just texting or calling someone at the gas station.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, we want to feel like we did it ourselves and what have you. But you know, we're also in a bit of a therapeutic age, you know, where people are becoming more and more comfortable. And I don't know whether it's just with I think it's probably with my audience, the metal community. Man, they're already marginalized. You know what I mean? So a lot of them got it. That's why why a lot of them listen to aggressive music, is because it's, I mean, they've already shown this academically that it's a great way it's a healthy way of channeling aggression, channeling, you know, very, very strong negative emotions. You know, you listen to a song and the lyrics are brutal about vengeance or something, but you think, well, isn't that damaging? No, because you got it out of your system. You let some steam out by turning the valve, so to speak. And one of the things that has been really, really, I want to say a blessing for me is just the amount of males that were very, you know, open about how they felt and just or just supportive,
Right.
you know, because it's real. Because I thought when I first started this, and I started in 2009, I thought, man, I'm going to get trolled. You know what I mean? Like, but you just figure, you know, who is this guy? And and I've had people who become very close friends who at first were kind of like, what the hell is this? Is he like a wrestler or something, you know, putting on an act, that kind of thing? And I don't put on any kind of act. I've talked just like this. Yeah. I mean, if you were to close your eyes, you don't see the actual person, you wouldn't know it had anything to do with heavy metal. Right. You know what I mean? It's just outside of the outro music, there really isn't anything that's based on heavy metal. But you know, it's just helped to kind of get into that niche. But actually, I wasn't trolled. Even on YouTube, it's amazing how rare it is that somebody will actually. Now I get more of it now that I'm with Mac,
right?
Because it's a different audience, and they don't.
Yes.
They have no idea who I am and why are you there. You know what I mean? They could understand another special forces guy, but who are you? You know?
Now, I don't mean to interrupt you, but one of the questions I had when you deal with that type of stuff, like why is it okay for someone to have that opinion? Why would they look at you and be like, why is he there? Why can't you be there? It's like, I think part of the problem with society today is that everyone is just always questioning and not accepting of different people. And it kind of goes with the whole metal ethos. Yeah. These guys are outcasts. They're all West Memphis 3. These guys are black fingernail polish. They listen to death metal. And there's a lack of understanding where it's just so weird to me when you say that questioning why you're next to Pat. Or vice versa, whether somebody in your community is like, why is talking to a special forces guy, he's pro-gun or whatever. Right, and it's like, how do you... After when I started my podcast, I don't care what people think of me.
Sure.
I care that people at least give me the time. If you disagree with me, I'm okay with that. And I welcome all comments like that. But when you don't have a solid reason why you don't like what I'm saying, or you don't like one of my guests because he's or she, they're a transgender and I don't believe that, it gets my faith. Or if you have those reactions to people, I think those are the wrong reactions to have. And it's like, obviously you're dealing with that too. It is fascinating to me that people in this day and age will have this entitlement to, well, I can't listen to this show because why is he next to a special forces guy? He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating.
Yeah. No, it is. I mean, I've gotten obviously quite a good amount of criticism from a lot of those people. What I realized though with Mac is that because there was no reasonable explanation for it. I wasn't mumbling. I wasn't obnoxious. I wasn't, I was contributing to the conversation. In fact, I'm the one who makes the conversation. If Mac was doing a podcast, it would be 5 minutes long. So it's my job to keep him talking and keep him engaged because he's going to just be brief and that's it. So I got criticism instead of thank you for getting Mac to talk to, especially I'll get him to talk about stuff he doesn't normally or won't get asked about on other shows,
Right.
But what I realized was one reason for the criticism was because I said, Mac, I told him one time, I said, Mac, your fans are weird because they're hardcore. I mean, they're really a little too, and he realizes this. I said, they're like, I'll tell you what your fans are like, Mac. It's like if you fart, they're going to kick in the doors to come in and smell it.
Yeah.
And that ain't healthy. That ain't healthy. And you want to be respected, obviously. But when people just kind of go overboard with it, it's just a little bit too much. And he gets a lot of that. He's the most unprideful person you'll ever meet. Humble, gracious, hilarious. He's a dude. We are both, as we like to say, 5 minutes out of high school. I mean, if we're either dead serious or we are partying, one of the two. There's no middle ground with us, man. It's just, We're just dudes, when I talk about dude stuff. I mean, our talks are, when we do our live streams and stuff, we got just one-liners sprinkled through from Seinfeld, Letterkenny. I mean, just everything. Cause we're consumers, of culture. And so people think though that the guy, and I'm sorry for your audience who doesn't know necessarily who Pat Mac is, but you can look it up afterwards. But everybody kind of thinks he just eats concrete and spits nails all day, that he works out all day, that he's just this brutal thing when it's actually quite the opposite. He's one of the best people you'll ever hang around with.
Yeah.
But what I realized is where a lot of the criticism stems from is envy. Because in other words, if I was another special forces guy, then they wouldn't say anything.
Right.
Because they would say, well, that's an earned seat. But because they don't know who I am, and because I look like this, then it's like I'm taking their seat.
Right.
They want to be there.
Right.
They want to be the one next to him talking gun stuff or whatever it may be. And, but, he's, it's too bad,
It's just interesting because when you think of like special forces, I think they're the top of that field. But when I look at a stay-at-home mom that's raising 4 kids, working a night job, that's my special forces version of a single parent or a doctor or a teacher.
Totally.
It's like, people don't understand the fact that there are the higher tier people in every organization or every group or every profession. They have every right to be where they're at. They've worked hard. And even the people that aren't at the top or are trying to get there, there's no reason why they can't be at that same table too. And I think it's so tough for me because when I have the guests on that are like the Tony Blowers, John Doors, Rick Hogg, like those type of people, it brings out everything. It's like the gun people, the tactical people. But what I've noticed is when I start talking about stuff, not necessarily about like the tactics or when you talk to Pat, you could do a whole podcast on him where it just talks about his military life and career and tactics. But what I love about you, like you brought it up when you talk to these guests, you talk about stuff that's not going to necessarily they're going to talk about, whether it is music or fishing or trading dogs or like fitness stuff. And it's like there's something to that where you got to put these people out of their shells. And with you, it's almost like the perfect yin and yang how you and Pat did that, where it's metal guy, tactical guy, but when you meet in the middle, it creates that really cool content that, again, that I talked about earlier, is so important because you're talking about stuff that affects everyone.
Yeah, and I have to credit so much of him for that because he's just a very balanced individual, and again, he is humble, man. And I mean, he's one of my biggest supporters. I try to hold back so that I can give more space for him. And he's the one who's kind of pushing me back in. And I want to just say, I want to continue that thought. But what you just said, I think is really, really important. The most badass people I know are not in the military.
Right.
I call them tier 1 civilians. They are, especially every Mother's Day, I'll always say the same thing. I'll put out a video that just basically says, the single most powerful force I've ever seen with my own 2 eyes is a mother's love for her children.
Right.
It's how could,
yeah,
compared to nuclear, I don't care what it is, natural disaster, there's nothing more powerful in the world than a mother's love for her children. Because if you remove it, we're doomed. We're doomed. You know what I mean? They're the ones who do everything. They're the ones who really build. There's something I've seen women who are just wild and crazy young girls and just living their life, and they get that baby, and it's like they have a religious conversion overnight.
Right.
I've seen women who are all about their husbands or whatever. The moment they have that baby, she'll slit his throat if he does anything to that child. There's something about the self-sacrifice. It's the most unconditional, selfless love. Granted, I know there's bad moms out there. Okay, I understand that. But but we all understand what I mean. For most of us, we've had great moms that did the best they could. But for something to be that powerful, but yet at the same time, when it's doing its deed, it is defenseless. She can't fight off a horde. She can't fight off the invader into the house. She's tied up with children. She can't provide for everything, And so I'll often tell guys, I'll say, listen, if you're a dad, then your purpose in life to provide for and protect the most powerful thing in the world, a mother's love for children. And so, yeah, I think there are, people who deal with chronic pain, I know people very close to me who I don't know how they do it, John.
Yep.
I'd be a baby, I think. But just rheumatoid arthritis and spine and back pain and neck pain and just horrible thing that never goes away. So that's a really an important point I think we need to highlight. As much as I applaud, obviously guys who've done tremendous things in war and whatnot, and what it took to get to the level, especially like a Pat Mac, who's at the top of the food chain. At the same time, like Mac always says, hey, that's a part of my life. That's not who I am.
Yep.
He unless you ask him, he's not going to tell you about his, like, he doesn't park in veterans parking. You would never know that this guy is who he was. He'll talk to veterans and not even mention that. So, that's the kind of guy that he is, but he's the one that helped to make the podcast what it was, because it helped me to then be able to bring the latitude that we needed to be able to cover all the sort of things that you mentioned. And it's just, I wish I could say we planned it. You know what I mean? It's just kind of one of those things that just, we got lucky. And we're very similar about a lot of things, even though we come from completely different backgrounds. We're very, very similar about a lot of things. And that really helps. But I tell you what, man, I've learned more about tactics and firearms than I care to know.
Right. No, for sure. One of the interesting things with you, all the time and years you spent in the ministry and you transition into what you do now, when going through the ministry stuff and all the religious stuff, and you can kind of maybe talk upon why you left, but were you at this whole time, was music still very vital? Was metal music part of your life at that time? Like, were you listening to Stryper and Bloodgood, like religious metal, or was it very like metal, Sepultura, Deftones, that type of stuff?
Well, there were different periods, because I grew up in an atheist home. So, my conversion was a radical one, and it was in the 80s. Oh. So, yeah, I initially the Strypers and the Bloodgoods, and rest in peace, Michael Bloodgood, who just passed away. That Deliverance and other bands were very helpful for me initially in the transition. But then I couldn't stop, staying plugged into what was happening, and I didn't keep up with everything that was going on because I had other things I was doing. I was not just in ministry per se, but also I was growing my family, and I was going to school. I was doing things, Um, so, but yeah, it's, there's my my version of metal is always going to be the same version that I cut my teeth on, and of that same vibe. So yeah, it was metal music is, I always say metal is the soundtrack of my life, because it's just what I always resonated with. I never met the guy who was like only into Slayer for a summer in 86, right?
Right.
You know what I mean? If they were into Slayer in the summer of 86, they're still into Slayer now,
Yes. They are fully Dead Skin Mask as we speak.
Yeah.
When it comes to that type of music, and obviously the last couple of years, again, when they take away the arts and that form of therapy that music really is to people, it's cured people, it's healed people, and it's brought people back from suicide thoughts. And it's like when that gets taken away, just for me being on the road and seeing these crowds and festivals all over the world with hundreds of thousands of people, I don't care, even more so now after the pandemic, like every song, every artist, like it's just people needed this. And it's so fascinating watching people go back into the mosh pits again, or the pits and all this crowd surfing stuff. And it's so crazy that we get pushed all this, prescribed these drugs and pills just to stay happy, but you take away that one thing that people love, the arts, and you can't go to Broadway, you can't go to a concert. Now to see that bounce back into what it is now, it tells me right there, like, I hope we never go back, or we have more people to fight to protect those arts for dark times that will come again, because they heal people.
Yeah, I completely agree. The arts, the creative space is a marvelous thing. If you think about it, we can go back a few thousand years, and if you had a commercial jet airliner, it could have taken off during the days of Pharaoh. The laws of flight were there, and just to think that, there was a time when recipes weren't around, movies weren't around, planes weren't around, cell phones weren't around. So much of what we enjoy or could call life was not here, but the potential was always here. And that, to me, I was always fascinated by the idea of technology, because I got into the root of it. The Greek word is techne, 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 and it means art, artisan, craftsman. So, like you mentioned, the ministry thing in the Old Testament, the Greek version of it, the Septuagint, when they would talk about the guys who were like building the temples and stuff, they were called technes, because they were the artisans, the craftsmen, the skills, which makes sense because what do we call new technology? State of the art, right? So it's art, which means that technology is actually not the device. The device is not technology. The device is a manifestation of technology. Technology is the ability to create visible things with invisible means. So again, the potential to fly a plane thousands of years ago was there. And Shakespeare's stories were waiting to be told. Chocolate chip cookies were waiting to be, discovered, if you will. So nobody dug up, through archaeology and found a laptop. They didn't pick cell phones from trees. These are the end result of years and years and years and millenniums of advancing in people creating visible things with invisible means. When I was thinking about this years ago, I'd asked my kids one time, I said, we were at a Best Buy or something, and I pointed to one of the HD TVs, and I said, how long did it take for that HD TV to get there? They said, what do you mean? On the shelf. How long did it take for that HD TV to get there? So we started backing up. Well, then it had to be back in the warehouse, and they had to put it on the shelf, but how did it get to the warehouse, and how did it get on that truck, and backing up to the guy who created it? But he didn't create it out of nothing. There was existing technology before then that gave him, the plateau in order to create something like this. And you back up into campfires, the wheel.
Right.
So in other words, it took a long time for that television to get to that shelf, and that's technology. And that's what happens. Because if you listen sometimes, and you might talk to the guys from Shinedown about this, see if they've ever had this experience. Because I've heard James Hetfield say this, I've heard Michael Jackson say this, I've heard several I heard Noel Gallagher say this. They say sometimes it feels like the songs write themselves. You know what I mean? As if almost like you're kind of downloading it. It's just, it was too easy. It's just the story kind of told itself in a way. There's something about, because again, if we've gotten this far with technology, again, creating visible things with invisible means, then what more stories are there to be told? What more music is there to be created? What more wonderful things are waiting to be created? But that's a frightening thing to the powers that be.
Right.
Yeah. And so they like regulation. It's in the interests of the state to regulate a society, because that's the only way you make a top-down bureaucratic system work. I mean, Orwell gave us, fictional examples of this, where you had to. That's an interesting story. When in 1984, when the character, what's his name, Winston or something, he discovers the hidden book in the dictionary, right? And it's called The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism. You're like, what the hell is that? But the theory and practice of oligarchical collectivism. In other words, how do oligarchs stay in power? And so he's reading about the history of before they created this 1984 world that he lived in. They're talking about how they were going to control the upward mobility of people, because it was naturally in people's wiring to solve problems. If there was sickness, they want to create a cure for it. If they need entertainment, they want to make it. So that there's a drive within humanity to create and produce. So at first, these oligarchs thought, well, we'll make productivity illegal. And they said, no, that's a bad idea, because the people will obviously revolt and they outnumber us. So they came up with the witty idea of saying, well, what we'll do is we'll create wars. And so we'll consume all the productivity of people in the warfare state. And to keep us in perpetual warfare, we have to have terrorists. We have to have, so there was this Goldstein character that was constantly, setting off bombs and things. And then they would have these hate minutes, whatever, where they all of a sudden on the big TV screens, the Goldstein guy, like the big Osama bin Laden would appear, and everybody starts yelling at the screen and all that. So we keep everybody in this fervor for war. And then the news would keep changing the Ministry of Truth. We'd keep changing the story every day. Well, East Asia's at war with Oceania. East Asia's always been at war with with Oceania. It's like, wait, but the headline said something different yesterday. So they just keep everybody in this and then they constantly reduce the size of the dictionary. So your ability to think in larger terms is gone. And you're seeing that in a way kind of played out where language is being messed with, truth is being messed with. And I mean, we're all open for debate. We're all open for, let's argue. Let's debate and let the better man or woman win. I can't even say that now.
Right.
Can't even say that. But what you realize is that, going back to your point, we don't want to lose our ability to create and to make beautiful things and to enjoy the therapeutic power of music. I was talking to some musicians the other day who were griping, they often do. They were griping about tribute bands and cover bands. They said, this is killing original music. I said, no, it isn't. It's not killing it. It's just, that's what people, because I used to run a bar and venue, and I used to tell original artists all the time, I said, listen, I don't sell original music. And I'd hold up a bottle of Bud Light. This is what I sell. And if a jukebox will sell more of this, then I'll pick a jukebox over the band. Now, that doesn't mean that the music that's being played is my personal preference. Okay.
Right.
But, but I said that, but the downside to that, guys, is while you're arguing about original versus cover and all these other things, realize that window of people going to see live music is closing. Because there's a generation that's coming up who were raised on touchscreens and
Yep.
streaming music. And so they've never gone to a record store before. They've never put a CD in. They've never gone to a show. They don't know what that is.
Yep.
So that could go away in a sense, outside of us old fogies, if you will, keeping that alive. But it's just like, I remember when my kids were on Facebook. My oldest son was in college at the time. And that's what it was. It was like a college chat type thing. You know what I mean? It was called The Facebook or something like that.
The Facebook.
And then it eventually, morphed. And then all the young people split and it became the domain of us. And so the bars and stuff I ran down in Texas when I was doing it, all the cover bands were basically 80s bands, but you could see, I'd tell the artists, and I'm sorry we're so off topic here, but I tell some of these artists, I said, listen, come up to this bar, because we had 2 stages, indoors and outdoors. And we'd run a rock cover band and a dance band. So we get a lot of these horn bands and stuff that, play weddings and corporate parties. So they would play for us for cheaper because it would get them, clients. So I said, but you can come on any Friday or Saturday night. The place is going to be packed and you can go to either stage. And on either stage, dance band with horns or rock band, you're going to hear the same 3 songs played at some point during the night. You're going to hear Pour Sugar on Me. You're going to hear Sweet Child of Mine. And you're going to hear Don't Stop Believing.
Yep.
Both bands are going to play it. And you can go in the crowd anytime any one of those songs are played, and you will see that 75% of the crowd is going to go crazy when those songs come on. And I can go to my grave and never hear any one of them ever again. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter to me at all. Right. But I said, we're playing to the lowest common denominator. We're the shepherd going the speed of the slowest sheep.
Right.
But still, I would rather have that. I would, you go lock me up in a Turkish prison somewhere where I'm hidden away for 20 years and I'll come out and you can crank up Bryan Adams and Loverboy and Journey. It'll be the sound of America, man. It'll be the sound of America. And so, there's a part of it where you're like, okay, if I want to get trapped in the moment and get all snobby about my music. But on the other side, it's like, bro, you can still rock in America. Let's keep that going.
You kind of hinted at it, but especially with your work and social media and branding, when it comes to these new algorithms and trying to get positive content out there, I know we both know people that have been censored or whether right or wrong have been censored because they have a differing view on something, whether it's political or life in general. But when it comes to someone like you guys, my biggest fear is that maybe I'm not going to be able to see the latest quote you put out there, your video, or the thing you and Pat do, because the algorithm's telling me I would rather watch someone twerk for 5 seconds as opposed to listen to someone talk about life for 10 minutes. And so how do you, when you work with brands and even yourself, how do you deal with these changing algorithms and trying to get this positive content out there to people that really need it?
Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? It's tough for me because I get my wires crossed between my branding and marketing expertise and then my sense of mission, right? Because they are often in conflict. The algorithm, I taught music marketing for a while with a gal who has this thing called the Savvy Musician Academy, and she's phenomenal. And so I would teach her students, coach a lot of them. And I would often tell them, I said, the key for you guys is if you want love from the algorithm, you've got to show that your number one interest is the algorithm's number one interest. And the algorithm's number one interest is to keep people on the platform as long as possible. So design your content in a way that you can keep people on the platform longer, and the algorithm will probably favor you more. Easily said, not easily done, which is a phrase I hate, but it's just to make that point. If the algorithm sees that, as you said, the twerking is what gets the views and the clicks and the likes and the vanity metrics, then obviously that's going to be that's going to fill the news feed. And then you have the shadow banning factor, where if the algorithm perceives that there's hashtags and things of whatever it is, a political
Right.
phraseology or gun or whatever it may be, whatever the buzzword is, then you'll see stuff like on Mac's YouTube channel. It was just going, zooming up, and then Buffalo and Uvalde happened, and it just went immediately down for no reason whatsoever, other than the algorithm. They rewired the algorithm, and he's got videos where he's, we've got videos of his firearms instruction and whatever. So he's not doing anything bad. It's safe. It's the guy you want to hear from. You know what I mean? But because it has to do with that, his reach got cramped big time. So for me, I work by the premise. This is where, again, going back to my religious past, where I kind of take the model of the Jesus model, where at one point he had like 5,000 people who came out to hear him talk, and he fed them all, doing miracles and things like that. And they left. They all left, because the food was gone and he wasn't doing anything anymore. And so he was always down to his 12, So here's a guy with 12 guys that he basically ate and drank and slept with for 3.5 years. Yep. And we're still talking about, So in other words, he didn't need the 5,000. Just give me 12 I can invest myself in, and I'll change the world forever. And so that was kind of the premise when we started the squad was, well, let's start taking then from these audiences and bring them into get them out of that fish and loaves 5,000 waiting for every free podcast. And let's get these guys, let's get some out who would rather be with us around the campfire, so to speak. And we'll start investing in them. So that's what I mean about getting your wires crossed with mission and algorithm, or marketing, because I'll do everything I can to try and get around, beef up the production, try to hit on topics that seem to be more popular. But there was a movie called The Big Night a number of years ago with Stanley Tucci.
Yes.
And his brother was the guy from Monk. I forget his name, but
yeah,
the actor I'm talking about.
Yeah,
but it is a brilliant movie, and but it's set in the 50s. A couple guys straight from Italy. They wanted to open an Italian restaurant in America, and they were having the hardest time. And his brother, the guy from Monk, is just the most badass chef of all time. He is
Tony Schwab or Tony Schlub or Tony.
Something like that. So he's just an incredible chef. But everybody just wants spaghetti and meatballs. You know what I mean? So he's having a hard time selling this food. So there's another guy who's Italian. He's got a restaurant up the street, and he's just pizza, meatballs, and that place is packed all the time, And so he was the younger brother wants to become more popular. So he's trying to convince his older brother to make, let's make something that people want. But the idea was they finally sat down with the other guy from the other restaurant. The other guy said, listen, when people come to your restaurant and they order steak, they want to look down and see a steak. They don't want to look down and say, what the hell is this?
Right.
He goes, give them what they want. And then eventually you can give them what you want, And so in that sense, you have to play the long game in social media, building trust, credibility, engagement, that sort of thing, to where people they see you for who you are. They are attached to you. They've become dependent in a way,
right.
And then they're ready to go further. They're ready to hear things from you that they would have never listened to before. And that may mean getting them off that platform into something a bit more personal, but like we did. But there are ways around it. But if you just want to be super big on social media, yeah, you're going to have to sell your soul.
And it's sometimes I see some of those people, as do you, where they do sell their soul and they're not happy. They're miserable, and they're chasing this idea, this algorithm or concept that you need all these followers. And like one of my uncles always said, if someone's gonna give you $1, give 4 quarters, not 100 pennies. And it's always kind of been like, surround yourself with those, like you said, surround yourself with those core people. And in my industry with security and the company I'm in, give me four to five my 4 to 5 good guys. We're going to steamroll your 100, whatever people, whatever, what you're doing. It's like, it's so tough to, and I've got to the point now where it varied with the podcast. Everything I put out now, it's like, whether it's about domestic violence or PTSD or an actor or a musician or a guy about UFOs or Bigfoot, it's all kind of different and random. But I have found that as long as you are truthful to yourself and you are learning and you're asking questions, and so what if people disagree or you disagree with the guest? It's like, put that content out there. Let people decide what they want to hear and believe in. And I think there's something to that. When people start a podcast in the pandemic, 6 months later, once the pandemic ended, they stopped doing what they did. It's like, what were you doing it for? And it's like, do you believe in what you're doing? And I think you talk about that a lot too. It's like, believe in what you're doing.
Yeah. In fact, I was just talking about this yesterday. I was reiterating to someone, because I'll often you probably get these questions too. Someone will write me and they'll say, hey man, I want to start a podcast. What kind of gear do you recommend? And I'll tell them, well, before we talk about gear, let me ask you a question. How serious are you about doing this? Because there's a lot of podcasts and it's very competitive and it's going to take a lot out of you and it's not going to be rewarding for a long time. How committed are you? Because if you're not very committed, then don't even worry about gear right now. What I want you to do is pick a topic and go live on your personal Facebook profile. Just go live. And you can announce it ahead of time if you want to, but go live and put a simple line about what you're talking about and just see who tunes in and maybe do a couple of those. And if you get good feedback and you feel like that the idea has merit or warrant, blah, 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 then take it to the next level. But if you're just going to buy gear and then, start the podcast, you're going to have a hard time. Because there's a lot of people with great gear who are just an also-ran or an echo. And there's people who are doing it on their phone and their voices, same thing on YouTube. Some of the people who could be the biggest on YouTube have got the poorest production, but just because they're resonating, with something. And I want people to fill the space, because this is what we're watching is the greatest thing to happen in communication since the Gutenberg press.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal, the changes that have happened. I mean, you look at so when we first got on social media and the way it is now, used to be, you were like, you wanted friends. It was like a competition who had more friends, now it's like, who can I dump?
Yeah.
But the other thing is that if you understand the way social media works and the way information is basic, you say social media means broadcast, right? So broadcasting is social. In other words, broadcasting is from person to person now, as opposed to from mainstream or alternative media, which is now basically mainstream media. But I remember back in the day, if you were goofing off, wasting time on the internet, you were surfing the web. Right? Because you were like, I wonder if so-and-so has a website. You were just looking for stuff. You didn't know where you were going. You were just like, dude, this is cool. And you're seeing all these new websites and stuff. Now, if you're wasting time on the internet, you're on social media. So then you go back in the day, and it was also, if you were, information was searched for. So keywords and all of these things were paramount. Information was searched for. Now information is shared. So it's important to have that viral aspect to what you do. But the powerful thing about social media now is if somebody's really serious, and I say this to anybody, is then, do the best you can organically. In other words, use the existing platforms. Don't put a dime into it. Just build your audience as best you can. But if you want to get serious about it, then put money behind it. Because for all of that privacy stuff we bitch about when it comes to Facebook, it's very helpful if you're marketing.
Yeah.
Because I can find out if somebody, like when I was initially marketing Metal Motivation, like, well, who do I target? Because I could target people who like motivational content, Tony Robbins, Zig Ziglar, whatever, but they may hate heavy metal. Or, well, then do I target heavy metal people? Well, I could target heavy metal people and they will say, well, this is stupid. Motivation, who needs that? It's crutch. So who do you target? So once the Facebook ad manager became more sophisticated, I could then start putting in layers of interest. So I could say people who like Judas Priest, Metallica, Iron, just all the big bands, Iron Maiden, Pantera, Slayer, Megadeth. But then they must also like Zig Ziglar, Tony Robbins, this guy, Gary V, exactly, Grant Cardone. And then I can go even further. I can say, then they also must have read Think and Grow Rich, The Secret, blah, blah, blah. So I could get it down to where it's like 750,000 of people who love Maiden, Metallica, Megadeth, Tony Robbins, Gary Vaynerchuk, Grant Cardone, Zig Ziglar, read Think and Grow Rich. How much marketing do I have to do? All I do is I have a little ad that says daily motivation for people who love heavy metal. And they're like, how does Facebook know? That is exactly what I want. It's Tony Robbins meets Metallica. Boom. And they just like. So, but once you do that, then you can then target exactly who you want instead of just relying on organic reach. Because the algorithm bends to the pay, and it's still way cheaper than running on television or radio. You're paying cents, as opposed to thousands and thousands of dollars. This highly targeted stuff to a highly targeted audience. And then once they start to engage with your content, you find out what that dedicated audience wants. And if I find out, for example, that, I want to talk about this subject A, but they're really interested in subject B. They want to know how to get over a breakup. And I'm like, really? That's what they're interested in? Okay, well then I'll do a video on how to get over a breakup. Yep. But then I'll run those videos out and I'll see what the organic reach is initially. And it'll be really good. And I'll say, okay, we're hitting on something. Then I'll put money behind it. And I'll send that video out in one ad for cents a day to my existing subscribers. Because, Facebook doesn't show your post to everybody, right? Even though they subscribe to your page, they're not seeing it.
Correct.
So I'll send it out just to them. Then I'll create a second ad just like it and send that out to the same cold audience I was targeting that liked Metallica and Tony Robbins and all that sort of stuff with that video. But then Facebook keeps a record of who watches the video. And if I send another one out, it'll keep a record of who does that. Then I can say, okay, Facebook, go back 60 days and and it'll keep record of how long they watched the video. So I'll say, okay, Facebook, give me everybody in the last 90 days who watched my videos at least 75% of the time. I mean, at least 75% of the video. And Facebook will give me that list. Now I've got a list, let's say, of 15,000 people, 5,000 people. We're talking about some highly, highly targeted people. You know what I mean? Though if those 5,000 people just spent $10 with me, I'm good for the year.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I didn't spend a whole lot of money. So that's how I would get around all of this stuff. It's really found in the marketing and understanding how social media, digital marketing works, how to target the right people, how to put in front of them things that they want. For example, when I was teaching the musicians how to do this, I would look at their videos and they put out their music video, right? Lyric video, something like that. And it's good stuff. These are good musicians, but they're not signed by a label. So when they would put out a video that they wanted to promote, they would have like 3 or 4 paragraphs in the post, who it was produced by, and thank you for this, and the song is about this, and this is what I felt when I wrote it. And the song is really just about getting over a broken heart or the loss of a loved one, something like that. I tell them, get rid of all of that. This is what I want you to do. We're going to upload that same video. We're going to write one line. And all you're going to write is, if you've ever been through a breakup, comma, I wrote this for you, ... That's it. And then, because right underneath that is going to be a thumbnail, right, of the video. And what's on top of the thumbnail? A play button. Probably the greatest action maker in social media. Ever have somebody post a screenshot of and you're hitting it and it's not live,
Right.
So just if you've ever been through a breakup, then I wrote this for you. I said, you have to keep in mind, because that video is appearing right before a post by their mom and right after a post from a friend. So you don't want to look like a billboard. You want to look like a post. Right. I said, and get rid of this company name. It's social media. They're following people, not companies. So put your name, and don't worry about what your logo looks like. Nobody's probably ever going to see it. The logo for you right now is a circle profile pic with a blue name next to it.
Yep. That's
your logo. Right. So be clear about it. Right. John Spear blank and his picture. I wrote this for you. Play.
Right.
We got rid of all the clutter, and now you're targeting, and you're getting conversions. At that point, it's up to how good your music is, or how good your podcast is, or whatever it is that you're posting. But this will put horseshoes in your boxing gloves. And you realize, well, wait, I'm not at the mercy of the algorithm. Right. The algorithm's like the mob. It'll respond to money and not a lot.
One of my favorite quotes of yours is, with no fences guarding our minds, it's no wonder we get into self-destructive thinking. And you have so many other great quotes. I guess my question to you is, with your time reading scripture or the Bible versus hearing a song with the lyrics that hit you profoundly, do you grab from both of those when you come up with your quotes, or how to process or put something out there in terms of if someone's going through a bad day, like what's CJ's quote about mental health, or getting in that trench and digging your way out of it? Are you pulling for equal parts scripture, song lyrics? Like, what other parts of your life do you help?
I don't pull a whole lot from song lyrics, unless I'm actually quoting a lyric. I'll do that every now and again. But mine somewhat, I think anybody who's been around church or something is going to hear some of the similar vernacular, I've had people write in and go, hey, did you used to go to church or something? They can just tell by the lingo, it's hard to hide it. You know what I mean? But no, I mean, mine, a lot of it comes from, I'm the end result of broad reading and a lot of thinking.
Gotcha.
So I'm feeding from multiple streams. So there can be something I'm reading, for example, in business, and it harmonizes with something that I read over here in a war, history, something. And they meld together, and I see the similarities. And I'm never, one of the hardest questions for me to answer is people to say, do you have any recommended reading? No, I don't. Really? You don't read? I said, no, I read all the time. It'd be nothing you'd be interested in. They think I'm reading motivational. I said, I rarely, if ever, read a motivational book, ever. It's just not
right.
It's not of interest to me. But then the other side of this is the copyright, the writing skill.
Yes.
And so, I've been challenged myself to take ideas and make them into something. So where a lot of my quotes came from is from me writing. I'll write articles, and then certain things will pop out, and I'll say, you know what, I'm going to take that aside, and I'm going to rephrase that in a way that's more poignant, make it shorter. So that's where a lot of it comes from. But there's no doubt that there's going to be Bible influence in there. And just so people know, it's not like I'm telling you to,
right,
to get saved or something like that. It's just, it's just like guard your heart is what Proverbs says, guard your heart.
Right.
So I'm talking about guarding your mind, because that's what's important. But yeah,
it is interesting, because growing up Catholic and go to church and sit there as a kid, and even sometimes as an adult, like, oh God, like I have everything memorized. I know where to stand. I know when he's about to throw the holy water. But when it came to the homily, I was always the most interested in that part of it because
Yeah.
he took or she or yeah, I only had but
Priests.
so priest. And I've been to some Jewish temples and some other so one of my friends is Hindu, and the same type of thing happens where you really don't know what's going on in the letter to Paul or whatever these different
Right.
letters and this other stuff's happening. But when that comes to the priest talking or whoever, the secular leader talking, they're talking about everything they say is relating to those time of the book. They're talking about to what's currently happening in their lives or our lives today. And people that are able to read a book, like if you were to read something, and man, I don't understand what courage is, but
Right.
how CJ's gonna talk about courage is gonna resonate with me because now he's gonna pull out the parts that he's gonna help me realize and understand what these things are. And I think people that are able to do that, whether it's reading a book or hearing something for the first time, or those people are able to process that and put it out in real time to those that may not understand what's actually being said,
Yeah.
and then thus understanding it, it's super powerful for me. And I've always loved people like yourself that can kind of do that, where it's like when you watch your episodes with you and Pat or the stuff you do by yourself, it honestly, the first time I listened, I was like, oh my God, it's like going to a homily because they're
Yeah.
talking about stuff I'm familiar with, but it's such, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but the basic way you talk about that stuff is so powerful
Oh,
where
I
it doesn't
appreciate that.
scare away people. Like you look at Pat or somebody like you and be like, oh my God, they're too smart for me. But and you dumb it down in such a way that it's so powerful, eloquent that you don't waste words. And you don't waste time getting to the point of
Yeah.
something. And there's something really powerful with that.
They're very kind. Thank you very much. And I take that part of it very seriously. One of the advantages I had was actually from being in ministry. I'll often mention to people. I said, if you watch any of these voice competition programs, how
Yes.
many people came from churches? Because in
Yep.
churches, you're singing all the time. You're singing and you're sitting under speaker. I sat under speakers, 3, 4, 5 times a week, every week for years. And I mean, phenomenal speakers. Even some of the ones that were just absolute charlatans, they're still phenomenal speakers, and you appreciate those who communicate well and their ability to elucidate something, their ability to, make a point and keep your interest. And there's a cadence, a real rhythm to what they know where to put the inflection. And it makes listening easier. It makes it a lot easier. Mac is interesting because you don't normally get those kind of guys with that big a personality.
Right.
His breed, they're the type that vanish into the landscape when they come out. You know what I mean? When they retire, they disappear. You never see
Yes.
them again. You never knew who they were. They did dark things in dark places, and we don't need to know what they've done. Mac, on the other hand, he won't talk about those things. Like I said, he doesn't brag about military stuff or whatever. If you ask him something, he'll answer as best he can, but he's very animated and he has a tremendous sense of his purpose for his life now. In fact, for example, we were just talking the other day. He's actually writing a children's book right now. And
Wow.
yeah, so but to teach kids about certain principles that he teaches adults, but done in a way that's very, very creative. And he was reading the draft of it to me and my son a couple of weeks ago, and it's in that Mac, voice, but it's so warm and so alluring. I can already see we're going to be filming him do that in a little set or something, and the kids are going to want us, Dad, play the Mac thing, So he's unique in that he has, it's kind of built in with him. And but that makes for very, very interesting conversation because again, we have just different backgrounds, but we have a similar way of looking at the world. And so when either one of us says something that we may not have heard each other say before, we're often the first ones to go, oh wow, that's a good point. It's hilarious to try and watch us go through a door. There's something about being in your 50s where you've been on the planet long enough and you don't take yourself seriously much
Right.
anymore. And you just realize that life works better when you prefer others before yourself. And so it's just funny, I mean, I have so many things that are gifts from him, like, he's obviously into personal safety, and you'd probably slap me if I didn't, for not having a flashlight, not having a knife, and
Right.
these sorts of things, just everyday carry. Right. So Mac's like, dude, I've been looking at your pockets. You don't have a flashlight. And I said, no, I don't. And so he runs, because he's sponsored by everybody. He's got 50 of everything, So he comes down and brings me a flashlight. And then, like, last Christmas, he was Bruce Blades had done a Mac blade, whatever he calls it, but it's his blade, his design, his everything, and they sold out of those, and everybody wanted one. So he hit the guy. He goes, "Is there any chance you got one?" And so the guy looked around, like in his garage or something, and he says, "You know what? I actually have one left." He goes, "I want it. I got to give it to my buddy for Christmas." So he gave me that, so I have so many things from it. And then if you go to his house, you see on his walls, like in our podcast, you see that there's a canvas print of Eddie Van Halen in the back over his room kit. I gave him that. So we're always, all of a sudden he'll get a shipment of just Metal Motivation shirts, and just a big package of them, so we're always kind of surprising each other and that kind of stuff. And but it's an interesting friendship, because he's a true friend. And I remember, I know you're not asking about this, and I'm taking up time with it, but he's not a trusting person. These guys are not,
right. They're a different ilk.
Yeah, there's a different ilk, I mean, think ex-CIA types, that kind of thing. And well, he's been burned with people business wise, and so we were talking, and there was always, he was always gracious. We were hanging out. He whenever I came out, we'd party, but there was always just a little, you could feel it there. Until then, finally, one day, as we were talking more and more about business and we were already podcasting by then, but then we talked about doing some business stuff together. And he told me a story about someone who kind of, burned him. And I said, "Mac, why do I get the feeling you're telling me this for a reason?" He goes, "Because I am." But then one day we were at the pub, and I don't know what changed or whatever, but we were just sitting there. It wasn't the alcohol necessarily. It may have helped, but we were just sitting there, and he just looked at me, and he just said, "CJ, you are my friend." And I knew what he meant when he said that. And he just kind of held the moment there for a second, and things really began to change after that. And then after, once we got COVID, changed everything for us.
Right.
It was actually as much as we hate every part of it, like everybody else did, there was an upside to it. For us, it was. For him, I remember in 2019, I'd been talking to him for 2 years about starting an online coaching thing. And, but he was traveling so much with, teaching courses all over. And he told me one day in 2000, he said, "Dude, he said, I don't know if I can keep this up." It's just brutal. And he was missing his family, and he had chores backing up. And every time he had turned around, he had to get on an airplane again. And then COVID hit, and nobody was going anywhere.
No.
And everything shut down. And I said, "Well, now we can do it," and we did. And everything changed since then. He hasn't traveled since, has no plans on it. And he's very much a homebody now. But that, for our friendship and our relationship, once we started having to meet like this every week, and I'm out there all the time, and we're shooting vlogs and all this other stuff. And he knows my family, and, all that kind of thing. It really, really grew, but it took time. It took a serious investment, because I met him in 2016, and it took, a few years to get it to this place. And I hit him at just the right time. He exploded not long after I met him, but
we kind of talked about that, but the idea of, when it comes to people believing what you're saying, if it appeared on screen that you guys are just doing this, just two separate people for 2 hours a week, but the fact you do come off as you are friends, it's very believable when you look at each other, how you react. I think that goes a long way in terms of people believing what you're saying, or wanting to endorse these two friends talking about life from two different backgrounds. Again, it is very it's really cool to see you guys interact with us. Like, man, the first time I saw them, like, man, these guys are just friends having a good time. I don't care one did what, one did the other. They could both be a cook or a taxi cab driver. That same interaction is not going to change. It's very believable.
Yeah, that's what we wanted. We want people, the old fly on the wall thing. We want people to say, man, I'd love to be there when they're talking. And so we're still kind of finding our way. We kind of put off the podcast for a while because of the squad, and starting to pick it back up again. We've done one episode a month for the last 2 months, which is a miracle for us. Because again, we're doing 2-hour live streams every week, 2-hour Zoom calls every other week. So we feel like we're podcasting all the time. To do another podcast on top of that is like weird for us. So that's when we started to cover like events in history, like we did the endurance.
Yes.
We did Lewis and Clark. So we thought, kind of like we call it bro history, just, we're not historians. We just read the books and stuff. And we just talked about how crazy these people were and what the stuff they did. And so that's really been a lot of fun. And as of late, to make it easier on him, I said, let's start covering some books that you're really passionate about. I'll read them and go through them since you've already read them, and make it a little bit easier on him. And that's been a lot of fun because he reads like sports psychology. So that's been great, So yeah, it's
that endurance episode. It's that we say that I can picture you two talking about the that rugby team, their crash and resort to cannibalism. Yeah. Like I can just picture you two talking about that for 2 hours. And it's just about from survival to how to cook someone to you guys have something really special.
I appreciate that. Again, I wish I could say we planned it. And I've always been a jovial, extroverted kind of guy. So I've been looking for a partner, looking for somebody to work with.
Right.
And then, I feel like I kind of hit the jackpot with him because I can find jovial people, I can find interactive people, but to find somebody with his particular skill set and history and depth and wit and knowledge base, and here's I always tell people the story when to show you the kind of guy he is. He was on Joe Rogan's podcast. I want to say 2019. So I think it was.
Yeah, right before the pandemic, I believe.
Yeah, right before the pandemic. Yeah, and so I had given him a University of Badassery T-shirt. I said, take this and give it to Joe. So I guess they had been hanging out in Joe's waiting area. Joe was still in LA at the time. And so they start off the podcast and Joe says, all right, Pat Mac, president of the University of Badassery. And Matt goes, well, I'm more like the vice president. And so Joe Rogan goes, well, who's the president? You know what I mean? If I've got the badass here, who is the president? And he goes, well, that's my buddy CJ. And they went into the conversation, not realizing that the president of the University of Badassery doesn't mean shit. Just like in Delta Force, rank doesn't mean anything. But just the fact that in that moment, he's not going to take credit for something,
right?
Whatever he said, no, he's the one who,
right.
So it's like, dude, that speaks volumes to me for somebody like that to do that.
Before I let you go, I mean, obviously, I know you have your own merch line and everything you're doing with Mental Motivator and stuff like that. But where can people reach out to you? How do you want them to reach out to you? Is there a specific thing you want to send them to and stuff like that?
No, yeah, I would just if you're interested, I would say you can follow on Instagram, which is at Mental Motivator, or Facebook at Mental Motivation. So facebook.com/Mental Motivation. If you're interested in the merch type stuff, mentalmotivationstore.com. But yeah, most of the stuff is going to be just because I'm playing much, much more of the producer's role. I'm kind of like, Ron Howard after finishing Happy Days. It's like, do I stay in front of the camera? Or do I go behind the camera? And because Mac there's so much life to what he's doing. And there's such a, I'm dealing with a very mixed bag audience that, it's not the spending power, the resources of his audience is so much greater than Mental Motivation, and he needs my producer, marketer role, co-host, and that sort of thing. My son, makes film and video. So, we're a lot more useful there. And I do other things for other people too. There's a couple other podcasts I'm looking to co-host in much the same way. One's about German Shepherds.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I would just follow on, IG or Facebook, and you'll get the gist of it.
And that's for you though, like a lot of the bands I know and stuff, like the artists, and I know they follow your stuff too. And it is kind of cool that having dealt with different bands, and I mean, I was just in catering in Hellfest in France, 105 degrees out, hot as hell, and talking with a bunch of the Sepultura guys and Saxon and all these bands up there, Offspring, Dropkick Murphys, and it's just we were in a conversation. I was in catering, and we're just talking, and we're talking about podcasts and stuff, and one of the guys knew what I was doing, and we're just talking about, man, what would be cool? I was like, would it be cool to like podcast just dedicated to music, but like in like a cool way, and obviously familiar with your stuff. And we went down the rabbit hole, and the guy actually knew who you were and knew about the quotes. And it's one of those things too, where it's like, you never know music and metal specifically. Yes, you're going to have the Pat McNamaras in a kilt in the driveway listening to Sepultura, or you're going to have the guy doing Slayer doing R1 push-ups in the driveway who's Special Forces. But you're going to have that single mom who loves Korn or loves whatever it is. It's like the power of music and how it's brought people together. It's just fascinating. I think
it is
for you to be out there in that world. It's like, you never know, those big tough metal guys might need to hear some motivation, or that fan might need to hear motivation. It's like, we all need that motivation, and what you're doing out there in that community is super powerful.
Oh, John, thank you very much. You can get, as you can spend so much time on this side of things. You don't really hear from people. You don't know. You're just kind of putting stuff out there. You don't really know what people think or who it's reaching. Right. So if I don't hear from, especially somebody like you, who's a peer, a colleague, it means a lot. I know what goes into these sorts of things. And dude, it's an honor to be with you, man. Like you're rubbing elbows with Saxon and Sepultura, not me.
Right.
Shine down and trust you with their lives. So that's, that's pretty heavy, dude. That's heavy. It's an honor for me to be connected with someone like yourself, who's, who works in the music business at that level, which I know is becoming a more critical part of things as the world in some ways grows more dangerous. So
of course. Well, CJ, this has been awesome. We'll have to do it again, but I wish you all the success and everything you're doing. Too, and give my best to Pat and yourself, and stay safe, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Take care, buddy.
Awesome. Thank you. How's it going, everyone? John here, the host of Spear Talk. You might not know this, but before I record an episode, I like to break a sweat. And I do that using the Chop Fit. Over the course of the past year, the Chop Fit has allowed me to lose weight, tone up my body, and feel even more amazing about myself. A feeling that you should all feel about yourselves as well. If you use this code, SpearChop10, you get $10 off your order. Once again, use code SpearChop10 for $10 off your Chop Fit order. It'll change your life. Thank you.